Hey guys, it's Camille, and I'm here with Robyn. I totally forgot to ask her how to say her last name. I'm thinking it's Fivush, hopefully. And she is from Emory University, and she has done some studies on families and the communication that they have with each other and the connections. So we are going to invite her on and find out more. Okay. Hello, Robyn.
Hi, good afternoon, Camille. Nice to be here.
I'm so glad that you decided to join us. This will be so much fun. I'm excited. So why don't you tell us where you are from and maybe how you got into doing this study?
Okay. Well, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm at Emory University, and I spent most of my career in the Department of Psychology, but now I'm the director of the Institute for the Liberal Arts.
Oh, cool.
And I've been doing research on family storytelling for 30 years. So I've
Oh, cool.
done work with parents with their very young toddler preschoolers and how they begin to talk about the past together. The work that you're referring to is with adolescents, particularly around the dinner table and how families tell stories. And more recently, I've been interested in adolescents and young adults and how they both tell the stories of their family history and how much of their family history they know, and how that is related to their own sense of who they are and how they tell their own stories.
That is so cool. So my husband loves the Braves, the baseball team, and they won last night. So it was a close game.
Yes.
So super exciting there. Awesome. I just love that you are exploring this, both with the toddlers and preschool age kids and with adolescents. I think it's a study that needed to happen because we need to know how these interactions benefit us and our kids. So thank you so much for doing these studies. Um, what uh, what your first study? Why don't you tell us about that first study that gained lots of publicity and
Yeah, it actually wasn't the first study, but
oh, it wasn't. Oh no.
and the only reason I want to make that clear is that I think it's really important to underscore that one study never tells us anything. Even
Agreed.
though one particular study might get a lot of media attention, it's always a body of research. So I
Uh-huh.
really want to say, we've been doing this work for a lot of years, my colleague Marshall Duke and I, and so I feel very confident because the study I'm going to tell you about was actually a very small study.
Oh,
It was,
that's so
it was
funny.
about 37 or 38 families that set
Yeah,
the stage, but we've now worked with hundreds of families. And so
that's
the
so
results
cool.
I'm going to be talking about really have been replicated and are pretty. I feel very comfortable talking about this as being what we found. But in that particular study, we were interested um, in how narratives spontaneously come up, how families spontaneously talked about stories in their everyday lives. So we just tape recorded dinner time conversations, and we
Oh
tape
wow.
recorded several dinner time conversations from just under 40 families. We started with 40 families, but not everybody completed the study. They were all families who were in Atlanta. They were um, mostly two-parent families. Almost all of them had two or three kids,
Okay.
some adolescents, broad spectrum of where in Atlanta they lived and background and so forth. Uh, and what we just were curious about family storytelling as it just occurs naturally. And I
Okay.
went into this study really thinking that one of the most important things we would find is how families came back together and told each other the stories of their day, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So parents saying, what happened at school? How'd you do on the math test? Did you have a fight with Sheila again? And we really went into this thinking those were going to be the really critical stories that bring kids back in to the family fold and they are important. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
they are important. But we were actually surprised at the number of other kinds of family stories that were told just, Tuesday night over spaghetti. And these would be stories about things that the family did together. It might be remember when we went to the beach last summer. Remember when we went to, when we went to the opening night of Star Wars. And maybe even more interesting, parents would talk about things that happened when they were kids. And the
Okay.
children around the table not only were interested, but it was clear that these stories had often been told many times before. And the kids themselves were participating and telling, no, no, wait, last time you said it happened this way. And the mother said, no, this way. So the kids were engaged. And it turned out that those kinds of stories, these family stories, and particularly these intergenerational stories, were
Uh-huh.
were better predictors of child well-being. And we had a lot of measures of child well-being. We had self-esteem. We had we measured behavior problems. So it was a lack of behavior problems, lack of things like withdrawal, anger,
Okay.
aggression, as well as more positive things, a higher sense of social relationships, more pro-social skills, and as I said, higher self-esteem. And we've now replicated this several times. So these intergenerational stories seem to be very important for young people.
That is awesome. That is so great. You and Marshall Duke came up with 20 questions. Can we
Yes,
talk about those 20 questions?
absolutely.
Yay.
So, so, so because we were maybe not completely surprised, but we were surprised that it was the intergenerational narratives and family history narratives that played such a strong role in predicting well-being, more so than the other
Yeah.
kinds of stories. So we wanted to do more research to figure out, this relationship. What is it that adolescents and young people know about their family history, and does it matter? So we went about doing that in two ways. And one way we did it was we developed the 20 questions, the do you know scale. And we just simply asked them, like, do you know where your grandmother was born? Do you know where your grandfather went to school? Do you know how your parents were met? Simple yes, no questions. There are 20 of them. And it turns out that the more yeses you get, the better outcome we see. Again, lots and lots of different kinds of measures of well-being, self-esteem, perceived competence, academic competence,
Cool.
also again, fewer behavior problems, less substance abuse, less smoking. Um,
Wow.
and what's interesting, it has now been expanded. Other people have used this, and we now know that military veterans returning from war zones who know more of
Uh-huh.
their family history are less likely to develop PTSD. So it's very
Wow.
powerful. But at the same time, I want to say two things about that. One
Yes.
is, it's
Yes.
not just a checklist, right? We talked about this yesterday.
Exactly.
It's not like, oh, I can just tell my kid, this is where your grandmother grew up. Oh, this is how, right. This is an indication that families have been telling stories. The only way that kids could know this is if they've been told it. It's not their
Exactly.
experience. They had to have been told a story. So it's not that story or any particular story. It's that stories are told by the family. You don't want to tell the story of how you met your spouse? They don't, that it's not critical. It's that there are family stories and that these family stories are shared.
I love
The
that.
other thing I want to say is that we've also done a lot of research, not just asking yes or no, do you know these stories, but asking adolescents and young adults, tell us stories you know.
Oh,
And
okay.
we found the vast majority of adolescents, so 97% of the adolescents that we've worked with now in many studies and across different cultures, know these stories. And the adolescents who are able to tell more detailed stories, more coherent stories, and stories that really capture what their parents were thinking and feeling are the ones
Okay.
who are benefiting the most from these stories.
Okay. That is so cool. Yeah, I love that you pointed out that it's not a checklist. It's the fact that you are telling stories. That is the important part. And these stories can come from your own life. That is your personal history. And those are the stories you can tell. You don't have to have stories of your third great grandpa or your 10th great grandpa. It's your stories and your parents' stories that you know. I love that.
Absolutely.
And that you're telling them. That's the important part.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I love that. And if I remember right, I read that I think it was in Bruce's book, The Secret of Happy Families, right? I think that's the title. Okay.
Yeah.
That um, telling these stories to toddlers and preschoolers help them start telling their own stories, that they now
Mhm,
have these words that they
mhm,
can use. Is that from your
mhm.
study with toddlers?
Yes, yeah. So my
Okay.
initial work, like the first 10 years of my work, I really focused on very young kids. I was really
Okay.
interested in how families pulled children into a storytelling culture and how they helped young children shape their understanding of their own experience. Now, for very young kids, when they're 2, 3, 4, and you know this, you have young kids,
Yes, I do.
they it's really stories about their experience,
Mhm.
tell mommy what happened at daycare. Well, what happened first and then what happened? So it's helping them kind of create a coherent message,
Okay.
coherent story about their own experience, and helping them to learn how to communicate about their experiences through these expected ways, through stories. But what we also found is that these um, parents who do more of this scaffolding or structuring or helping their children develop these more coherent and more emotionally expressive stories have
Okay.
toddlers who become not only better at remembering their own personal stories, but they're also better when they get to school in terms of literacy, and they
Oh,
also
okay.
show better emotion regulation because so many of these
Okay.
stories are about emotion.
Yes.
Um, so the intergenerational stories really start to come into more of a play as kids get older, maybe
Okay.
10, 12, and certainly into adolescence, when they start to expand their horizons
Yeah.
and they really can understand more abstractly, what does it mean that mommy was growing up and that this was an experience that you had when you were a little girl? 3-year-old can't quite get that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, it's that emotion, talking about emotions and naming that emotion is what's really important for the younger
Yeah.
kids. And then once they get older, then you can go into how you guys have that connection because you've had a shared experience, or
Mhm.
they can think back on those experiences and realize what's happened and how they can help their own lives. That's awesome. Great. Let's see. I was going to ask another question. I can't remember it. So what other studies are you doing or have you done that you would like to share
Mhm.
with us?
One of the really exciting studies that is just actually going to be published very soon, I think now.
Okay.
We expanded this into different cultures. So
Okay.
stories are culturally universal. All cultures tell stories. Human beings are
Hmm.
storytellers, but cultures tell stories in different ways, and cultures have different senses of how is a family configured? Is it a nuclear family, an extended family? You know, so we actually did this research in New Zealand with my colleague
Oh,
Elaine Reese, who has a lab out there. And the reason we did it in New Zealand is because New Zealand is an interesting set of three very distinct cultures that all live together. There are
yes.
the indigenous Maoris are a
Hmm.
very oral culture, very kinship oriented. Kids, it's very important what your lineage is, and kids
Yeah.
start hearing stories about their ancestors like from birth. Um, and then there are the European descent New Zealanders, mostly from Scotland, who are more, similar to like the US culture, an
Hmm.
autonomous,
Yes.
independent oriented culture. And then there are uh, Chinese
Oh,
immigrants to New Zealand, and the Chinese culture tends to also be very reverential towards ancestors and towards parents. So we were interested in the kinds of stories that these three groups of adolescents might know about their parents when their parents were growing up, as well as what they might know about their deeper family history. And again, all of these adolescents knew stories about their parents.
yeah.
Um, so these are stories that are told across different kinds of cultures. And we saw the same patterns. The adolescents
Wow.
who knew more stories, and in all three cultures, who knew more stories and told more elaborate, coherent stories, were
Okay.
showing higher levels of self-esteem and
Wow.
higher levels of positive youth development.
That's incredible. That's so cool that it transfers across worldwide connections.
Well,
That's
at least these cultures at this point.
at least these ones. Yes, you're right. You're right. Yes, yes. But
I'm
you've got
optimistic,
a pretty
but
good
I'm an
span.
optimist. It's like, well, those are the three we studied.
Yes. That is awesome. That's so cool. New Zealand is awesome. I love New Zealand. My dad was born there, so that's
Oh,
cool to
really? Well,
hear about that. Yeah.
spent a
Yeah,
lot
my
of time
grandpa was
there.
down
I
there
love it.
teaching.
Wow. Yeah,
So
it's a
yeah,
good place, and it's
it's a
beautiful.
very cool place. It's very
Yeah.
beautiful. Yes. Yeah, they just went down there last summer, so that was cool to see pictures from that. Okay, what other studies did you do that you want to talk about? I know I'm
um,
kind of blindsiding you with this question. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
No, it's okay. It's just, we've done a lot, and um, I think I want to talk a little bit more about somebody else's work. And this is Adam
Okay.
Brown, who's at the New School, and that I referred to
Okay.
very briefly, because I think the direction of this work is really interesting. So he used the 20 questions, the Do You Know scale, and he was interested in whether or not family history, knowledge of family history, would actually be a resilience factor under experiences of extreme trauma. So he studied returning war veterans. And
Yeah.
what he found is that both the returning veteran and if they were married, and their spouse
Uh-huh.
adjusted better to civilian life if they knew more family history. So I think that suggests that this kind of knowledge of family history, particularly an understanding of the ways in which families always face challenges, really difficult challenges,
Yeah.
and yet maintain family relationships, get through it together, maintain bonds. I think that this is an indication that these kinds of stories really help us get through even really, really difficult times.
I love that. I love that. That is a neat study too. Our veterans are definitely someone who sometimes get forgotten. So I love that. I love that they have a resource if they need to go to, like family history, family stories, that they can
Mhm.
go to that and know that they aren't alone. I think that's great. Thank you. So we have a question from Catherine or Kathleen, sorry. Would you be okay answering that right now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So it's kind of a long one, but have you been able to determine that starting storytelling at any age can have positive impacts for storyteller as well? So like the elderly,
Yes.
talking about that.
Yeah, so there's so many interesting questions embedded in there. So I'm gonna say a couple of things. One
Okay.
is I think it's never too early and never too late to start doing family storytelling. I mean, if you think about even as new parents, an infant in arms, you're already telling them stories about who their parents are, who their siblings are. And it's just seeping in. And on the other hand, if you haven't done that and your child is now an adolescent, no problem. You can start now.
Just start telling those stories.
Um, but I want to also talk about the benefits for the storyteller, for parents and also for the elderly. So it's not just really beneficial for kids to know these stories. It's really beneficial for adults to tell these stories to the next
Okay.
generation. So for middle-aged adults, it shows positive impact on a sense of what's called generativity, the notion
Okay.
that you are leaving something for the next generation, that you
Oh, okay.
are having a positive impact in the world, that you're
Yeah.
leaving a legacy. And so for middle-aged adults who tell these kinds of stories, they report really positive benefits. In terms of elderly, there's some very interesting work by a lot of people, but I'll mention Susan Block on reminiscence in the among the elderly, particularly maybe at the end of life. So there's
Okay.
some work now with individuals who are really facing their last challenge, shall we say,
Yeah.
in doing life review work, and particularly doing it with family if they can,
Yeah.
really creates a sense of peace and a sense of harmony. And it also helps
Wow.
the family grieve once that person does die.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Never
I just
feels.
had an Yeah, I just had an aunt pass away, and she asked me to do her life sketch at the funeral, and so I spent many nights up there talking with her and finding out her story, and it was definitely a closing thing for me. So yeah, that's awesome. That's
Yes.
awesome. So yes, it does. So Kath, let's make sure we answered everything. So yes, there are positive impacts. Yes, elderly. Yep. So we answered them all. So we are good with that one. Okay. And then Tara Lynn asked another question. She said, can you tell us more about your current study with college students and telling their stories during COVID? How can stories help us get through this year?
Yeah, thank you for that question. This is not so much about family stories or intergenerational stories, but of
Okay.
course, the way we tell our own personal story is influenced by
Perfect.
the way that our families tell stories. So adolescents and young adults who grow up in family telling stories do tell more coherent and elaborated stories about their own experiences, which is also good for us, by the way. So the study that we're doing now, we were focused particularly on college students who were freshmen last year who really had
Okay.
their lives upended, pack
Oh my
up,
goodness. Yes.
just when their lives were opening,
Yeah.
going away to college. Um, and we were particularly concerned with students who might be at specific risk, who either financially or because they're first generation or underrepresented minorities, who we know already struggle a little bit more in the transition to college.
Yes.
So we're right in the midst of it right now. I can't say a lot about it because
Yeah.
we're still collecting
You're
data.
in it.
Right. But we did it, it was online, it was on, online responses. We have over 600 freshmen from 5 different universities who are
Okay.
providing stories about uh, challenging experiences during COVID, as well as life lessons during COVID. And we're looking at those narratives um, in relation to their mental health, because we're very worried about, you know, well,
Yeah.
everybody's mental health during
Yeah.
COVID, and also their academic progress. Are they
Okay.
able to stay in school, make academic progress, graduate? And are there points where we can intervene uh, if we know enough about what their experiences are like? Are there points where we can intervene to maybe
Okay.
help them uh, cope through helping them process these experiences in different
Yeah.
ways.
Okay. Awesome. It's so great. Okay, so Tara's second question is, how can stories help us get through this year? So is it just like knowing that our family went through something hard and they made it through it, or is it what is it about these stories that can help us through the year?
I I think that stories provide models of grit, models of resistance, models of getting through. Sometimes it's not even. Sometimes it's just we just had to bear with it and make it through.
We just have
But
to
the
do it.
fact that you made it through, the fact that you are a family that still exists, that still, um, you know, that you're still together, the story kind of gives you a sense of hope that no matter how bad it gets, we're going to get through it.
Awesome. Great. I love that. Thank you. Um, okay, I think we've got the questions answered, unless I missed one. Okay, so I want to pull it back into you. How can we find out more about the studies that you've been doing, or how we can apply them and better our own lives and in the lives of our children?
I do write. I do write a blog for Psychology Today called "The Stories of
Okay.
Our Lives," and
Okay.
I talk about the work, and I talk about how I get that many of the blogs include tips for how to engage in storytelling with kids at
Perfect.
different ages, and just kind of remind us all the power of these stories and what they
That's
mean
awesome.
to us.
Great. I put your blog down below so everyone can go and look at it. So this is a great place for you guys to go and learn more about what studies Robyn is doing, and how you can apply them to your lives. Olivia said earlier, let's see if I can find that comment right here. And I'll put the website back up in just a second. But she said she's been reading your articles, and so many of them are incredible, with lots of ideas that have helped her as a parent. So
Thank you
you're
so much.
already getting some out. And yeah, and I've been reading them too, and I just love them. I am so glad Bruce Feiler. I'm so glad he wrote that book and I read it, because
Yeah.
it
We were
it gives
so
you.
pleased that he publicized our work for us.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and in fact, our family plan that we have in October, this experiment, I have 3 or 4 different dinner nights, but I told them if they couldn't do dinner, they can do it any other time, where they're supposed to come together and talk about all those things. So that is awesome. Okay, we are going to wrap it up. Is there anything else that you would like to comment on or talk about?
No, I want to thank you for having me talk about this and for doing this. I think just getting families to talk about their stories. I think
It's
it's just
awesome.
fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We had a really quick question come in that I think is great
Sure,
to end on.
sure.
How can we find out about other studies that are going on in relation to these same ideas? So you were talking about the veterans and then the older people talking about their narrative.
Um, that's a great question. I think
Okay.
that I think there are a lot of popular media outlets for a lot of
Okay.
these ideas. I think Psychology Today publishes blogs by a lot of psychologists and
Okay.
researchers who kind of do translation from the academic journals to the
Layman terms.
popular media.
Yeah.
I think I think if you Google this, you're going to find a lot of media
Okay.
on
Okay.
this.
Perfect. We will look those up. Awesome. Thank you so much, Robyn, for joining us. Honestly, you were on my dream list of people to interview, so I'm so thankful for you for saying yes. Thank you so much.
I was happy to do it. Thank you for interviewing me. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're
It's
welcome.
been great.
Okay. And we are done. So thank you so much, Robyn. And I'm so glad you guys all joined us, and we will see you guys later.
Okay.